Hi, this is a short video to give some very important information on the Dick Smith $1 million Wilburforce Award. Around about 200 years ago, slavery was legal. It had been legal for over 2,000 years. Powerful people claimed that the economy would collapse and even that the slaves would die of starvation if slavery was abolished. Good people like Wilburforce showed leadership. Slavery didn't collapse. Capitalism boomed with the Industrial Revolution. Now we need good people like Wilburforce today to help solve a serious problem, and that's our obsession with growth. You know how we judge everything is good if it's bigger, if we have more stuff. And by the way, it's not just population, but here in Australia, last year we grew at about 2.1% per year. At that growth rate, we'll have 50 million halfway through the century, over 100 million people in Australia at the end of the century, and in the short time that Australia's existed, modern Australia, about 220 years, we'll have over 1 billion people. And can you imagine the amount of resources we'd need to feed that many people? It's obviously impossible. So there's no doubt one day we have to stop growing. Now there's no doubt that my generation, people of my age, have benefited from years of economic growth. But if you accept that there's a finite world, you have to accept that growth can't go on forever. In fact, many people are claiming that we're sowing the seeds for our own self-destruction. And it's interesting, you'd think we should be wealthier and better off each year, but in fact, in many ways, we're going backwards in life. Here in Australia, our working hours seem to be going up all the time. Housing affordability, most young couples can't afford a house. When my dad and mum bought a house 50 years ago, mum was a housewife, dad was a salesman. Not getting a lot of money, they were able to buy a house with a backyard close to Sydney. That's impossible today. A young couple, both would have to work very long hours and they'd be lucky to buy a home unit. What's going on? You'd think as we became wealthier, we'd be able to work less. Now, let me explain what's happening. In the system of capitalism, it's an incredible system for improving productivity. In fact, every year or so, productivity improves by 1%, 2% or 3% because of our ingenuity and self-interest. I'm told that up until the 1940s that this extra productivity was used to reduce working hours. Otherwise, you'd end up with people out of work. And so the 80-hour work week, 60 hours went down to 40 hours, even 36 hours or so. But since about the Second World War, there's been a complete change. The extra productivity of 1%, 2% or 3% per year has been used to make more stuff. Half the stuff's rubbish. But of course, if we don't keep buying it, people will be out of work. There'll be a recession. Capitalism will collapse. And think of the waste, by the way. Go to a typical shopping centre, half the stuff you buy there isn't absolutely a necessity. The packaging waste, I can't believe it. And let's look at transport. At the moment in Australia, oranges come from California or orange juice from South America. But of course, if we stopped buying and started to reduce and make things more efficient without proper planning, we'll end up with people out of work. People will say there's recession, we'll throw the government out. And of course, times won't be good. I have a feeling that in the simpler days, people were a lot happier. It's interesting, I've got lots of material things. I have to admit that I'm well off. I've got a boat, a few cars, a helicopter, a couple of houses, but I actually don't feel as happy as I did in the older days. I don't do as much bushwalking, which doesn't cost anything, which I love doing. And it's interesting that there's a chance that if we keep growing at the rate we're growing with the way we use resources and we pollute our environment, that we could actually completely destroy the environment that we live in, the planet that we depend on. Prince Charles said, as we sleepwalk our way towards the edge of catastrophe, and there's a very good chance that this is so. So it's clear we can't always have constant growth when we're living in a finite world. Now, is it possible to fix that? Well, I think it is. We have to act quickly. In other words, to have prosperity without growth. There's so much waste, as I mentioned. Do you know what? Capitalism managed to cope with not only the abolishment of slavery, but very strong antitrust laws, and we call them trade practices laws in Australia, and of course very strong environmental laws. As long as there was an even playing field, capitalism would cope with it. Because the waste is so great and the efficiencies that can be gained from capitalism every year can solve a lot of problems. So can you imagine if we change to a system where there are laws that stop the growth in the use of resources? What would happen? I can tell you what will happen is you'll end up with less work hours, because we have to have less work hours to keep people employed. The huge excess of capitalism can be used to improve the quality of life, but that has to be properly planned. In fact, we need a new system. Instead of throwing out our government, if the gross domestic product doesn't increase every year, we could move to something like the General Progress Indicator, which measures quality of life. That's what I think we'll have to do. And that's what the Wilburforce Award is all about. I'm looking for a young person to get out and show leadership on this important issue. A young person who can show leadership like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, or in modern times, my time, Mikhail Gorbachev, who let the Berlin Wall come down without any loss of life. That's leadership. Now, how do you apply? Well, in fact, there's no application form. What I'm looking for is a young person who's got enough get up and go to go out and start communicating around the world the fact that we have to have prosperity without growth. I want young people to go on the internet, YouTube, MySpace, Facebook, whatever you call it, Twittering, blogs, maybe start a Wilberforce political party or even a new religion. Become a hero on the fact that we can have prosperity without growth. Maybe a t-shirt. Look at this. You could put constant growth equals doom and walk around the world. Now, this is as important as abolishing slavery, and it will be just as hard. By the way, you don't have to invent a new system. There's an incredible number of books and websites dedicated to prosperity without constant material growth. The next 100 years, People Quake, Hot, Flat, Crowded Earth. There's so many of them. They'll all be on the Dick Smith Population website with further information. Now, it's not going to be easy. I'll tell you why. Because normally where you get the publicity for a new political movement or a new idea is in the media. But the media is obsessed with growth. Look at the Murdoch empire. I mean, imagine if Rupert didn't have growth. I mean, he's got another 20, 30 years, maybe, if he's lucky to live, and in that time he wants to grow his business as much as he can. So to actually get publicity in the Murdoch press, or in just about any of the capitalistic media about saying maybe we should look at a new system which doesn't result on constant growth of resources, it'll be very hard. But that's the challenge. By the way, it'll be possible because most CEOs, company chief executive officers and presidents, even though they are on a bonus for increasing the turnover of their business, making it bigger so they can get more money, they've also got children and grandchildren. And once it's pointed out, and I found this to myself and to many of my wealthy friends, that we could be destroying the world for our children and grandchildren, it's amazing how people stand back and say, oh, maybe we've got to look at fixing the system. Interestingly enough, most of my wealthy friends realise that, well, one day, Dick, you've got to change our present system. You can't always grow. But it's interesting, they say, oh, but that's years away, so let someone else worry about it. I want the young person who's going to communicate that we have to start working on that now. How will I judge the winner? I'm going to be watching the media. I'm going to be watching for this person who makes the issue famous. It could be a number. I'll then contact that person or the group of people and talk to them and find out who is the most likely person who could most satisfactorily use the $1 million. Can they spend it all themselves? Well, yes. I would say that they should have a salary of at least $100,000 a year. Good people need to be paid well, so that will come out of the $1 million for 1, 2, 3 or more years, however long it's decided that this will go for. A lot of the money will have to be spent on marketing and advertising because there'll always be that problem of getting communication on this important issue in our so-called without fear and favour press. Now, I'll then choose who is the most likely person, and that $1 million will be allocated. I can tell you one thing for sure. The $1 million will be paid out a little over 12 months from today, and then we'll see what happens and how well that person can use the money to effectively change the world, to become the William Wilberforce of the 21st century, to do something which is incredibly important, to be able to change the world so we're sustainable, that we just don't keep using resources when we know they're going to run out one day. Thank you.